Just give it a few minutes just to sync up. Sort my glasses out a little bit. And in 3, 2, 1, and hello and welcome to Straight Until Disney, a Disney deep dive and analysis podcast, where each week I, your host Jonathan, takes a deep dive into the history of each Disney film and the legacy that they left behind. I'd like to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram at StraightUntilDisneyPod, and you can email me at straightuntildisneypod@gmail.com. So I want to firstly start off this week's podcast by thanking you all for showing so much love to last week's episode, where I chatted with the lovely Tom Taylor, who's an absolute gem of a friend of mine, and we had a really fun chat, and I'm really glad that a lot of you have found that so interesting, and I'm hoping I've been chatting to some people about getting them on later down the line at some point, so that'd be cool to just have a bit of a mix of rotating people on and off. As well as that, I also want to just say that Fun Fan, I can never say this right. I'm intending to get Fun Fancy and Fun and Fancy Tree. I'm intending to get Fun and Fancy Tree up potentially Thursday, depending on where things fall in terms of structuring, just so I can get back on track, because we're now, no offense, but we're now a little week behind of scheduling of where I wanted to be at for the films, but that's not too much of a problem. But we'll hopefully be able to get back on track. So let's begin this week's episode with some mousekeeping. So there's not too much in terms of news, but there is a few tiny things. This week marks the 65th anniversary of 101 Dalmatians. It also last week marked 20 years of High School Musical, which is scary to think it's already 20. Zootopia 2 digital releases today on all platforms that you can buy the buy film: Sky Store, YouTube, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, all those places. So it's available for digital and will be released on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K on March 3rd. So it'll be out on DVD soon. I don't think it'll be in the classic sleeves for a while, considering we're still waiting for Moana 2 to be in the sleeve. So if you're a collector like I am with the discs in the special collector editions, they're still not out. To be fair, not as bad because we're still waiting on a lot of the Marvel ones, and Inside Out 2 isn't out on its one yet, so hopefully it shouldn't be too soon. The only other bit of news is that, and this is Marvel related, is Wonder Man all episodes streaming Wednesday 28th. So that's all 8 episodes streaming straight away under the Marvel Spotlight banner. So this week's episode is Make Mine Music. As you probably remember last week, or when I've been chatting about it, I call it Make Music Mine. It's just how I always remember it. And maybe, I don't know why, but I think personally I don't gravitate towards this film. I tend to not even really think about it, to be fair, which it's not a bad thing, but in reality I don't really gravitate towards this film because, to be fair, the package films, they're all right, but you can probably tell from the episode length. So these ones, it's like I'm just trying to get through them because there's not really too much to divulge and discuss about each of the legacies that they have within parks, media. Afterwards, there's not too much discussion about the production history, so they're much more smaller episodes. So the film was directed by Jack Kinney, Clyde Geronim, Hamilton Lusk, Joshua Medor, and Bob Cormack. Film, as always, produced by Walt Disney. The film was written by James Baudrillard, Homer Brightman, Erwin Graham, Eric Gurnley, T. Hay, Sylvia Holland, Dick Hemer, Dick Kelsey, Jesse Marsh, Tom Reeb, Cap Palmer, Erdman Penner, Harry Reeves, Dick Shaw. Sorry, I'm just reading from my notes, it's a bit small. John Warbridge. As well as Roy Williams. Music was by Elliot Daniel, Edward Plum, Oliver Wallace, and Charles Welker. Studios Walt Disney Productions, as usual. Distributor was RKO Radio Pictures. The film was released April 20th, 1946 at its New York premiere and was released in the US globally on August 15th, 1946. It has a runtime of 76 minutes. Its language was English and it had a budget of 1.35 million. So Make Music Mine is the animation anthology produced by Walt Disney Pictures that had been distributed, as said, by RKO Pictures in 1946 and obviously released in theatres nationwide on August 15th the same year. And Make Mine Music, I almost slipped up again, is the 8th animated feature of the Disney animation canon. During World War II, much of Walt Disney's staff was drafted into the army, and therefore, obviously, we're not going to get the big pictures that we were seeing with Snow White, Pinocchio, because they were named. And those that remained were called upon by the US government to make training and propaganda films. As a result, the studio was littered with unfinished story ideas in order to keep the feature film division alive during the difficult time. The studio released the package films, as I've discussed. This is what we're currently going through before we get back to Cinderella, and that's not a bad thing, because they had to stay afloat during World War II, and a lot of these films, when we get through them, you do hear me go on about World War II. It's a very big contextual factor within these films, and truthfully, I would be like, it's okay, but you're trying to find an escapism through these films. So I think personally, with these package films, you can't really find that kind of escapism that you can find in some of the earlier and films that are released after this period. That might just be a personal preference. So featured in this film are the talents of Nelson Eddy, who narrates the characters of the whale, who wanted to sing at the Met. Dina Story is a singer on the Silhouettes. Benny Goodman is a musician on the Cats Join In and After You've Gone. The Andrews Sisters are singers on Johnny Fedora and Alice Blue Bonnet. Jerry Colonia is the narrator of Casey and the Bat. Andy Russell is a singer on Without You. Sterling Holloway is the narrator of Peter and the Wolf. Ria I'm gonna butcher this name. Ria Bauchinskia and the Lichin are dancers in the Two Silhouettes. Pied Pipers are singers. The Kingsman are singers. The Martins and the Chords. Ken Dent Derby, it's chorus, singers, Blue Bio. John Brown is an umpire on Casey and the Bat. Frankie Marvin is square dance Caller on the Martins and the Coys. Pinter Korvick does vocal effects, as does Jimmy McDonald doing vocal effects. Phil Ravenscroft is a singer, and Clarence Nash is the Whiteley Seagulls scientists barking like dogs. So there's a lot of people who are involved in this film, and I find it really fascinating that there's a lot of. This is very music based, this film, and it's totally understandable because obviously it's called Make My Music, so it's all about the different genres and styles of music that you can produce and craft. So I do wonder how much of that could have lent into some of the later films in the way that the music was crafted. But I also think some of these aren't like the greatest of musical scores when it comes to certain films. So I do wonder what that could have meant for these films. Production history. So during World War II, obviously, as I've discussed, a lot of the staff were crafted into the army, and obviously they faced severe shortages, as many animators were drafted to the military, as I've mentioned, and therefore you can understand why they opted to go with package films and craft films in this manner. And I do think that's interesting, but I'm also now starting to think how much more can I discuss about World War II when it comes to these films, and I'm trying my best not to go too depth into it because personally I want to keep this podcast happy and full of joy, which is why we've got anthology films. So Make Music Mine, released in 1946, originated a compilation of independent musical short segments produced during the period following the studio to repurpose existing ideas and collaborations without committing to full-length features, as we've discussed. A key element of these films was the inclusion of Sergei Provansky's, I butchered that name completely, it's Peter and the Wolf, which Disney had acquired the rights to following the 1938 meeting with the composer. On February 28th, 1938, Provansky, that's how I'm just going to pronounce it. It's not probably how it's pronounced, but we're going to go with it for now. Honestly, you know by now. We just roll with it on this podcast. He visited the Disney studio where he performed the piece on piano for Walt Disney and composer Leigh Harlan, working interest in the animated production that would visualize the characters in Fricht. The project was delayed by the war and Polanski's return to the Soviet Union with an immediate contract signed, but Disney revived in the mid-1940s for inclusion in Make My Music. You should play a drinking game how many times I call it Make Music Mine in this episode, because it's gonna happen. Adaptation decisions emphasized narrative shift to highlight Peter's heroism and independent, aligning with American cultural values at the time. And once again, it's very much in tune with making sure that audiences understood the way that the war should be seen. And therefore, the completed film would mark Disney's first entry into international competition, and was selected for the 1946 Cannes Film Festival, where it competed in the feature films category and won the Grand Prix International des Animés. The recognition underscored the studio's resilience in adapting to wartime challenges, which is very much a staple for films. We've already seen how films are still adapting to changes now, and that they're very much in tune with what's going on with the world and trying to reshape and align society's issues and values to a modern audience. The production of Make Music Mine was profoundly shaped by World War II, which I've mentioned constantly above, and there's not really too much to discuss about its production history because it's so wrapped up in World War II, and if you want to really deep dive into it, I would suggest having a little read because there's not really too much. And frankly, it's not like one of those films where you're gonna go, I want to know how that was made. That was because it's all right. It's not great of a film. So we're gonna move on to the film because I think personally we should move on there where there's a little bit less contextual values because personally I don't really want to talk about it. And I know we should be talking about it, but I just think keeping this really light and nice-hearted. So the particular film is presented as a musical fantasy in 10 parts. Part 1 being the Martins and the Coys, a rustic ballad, and this featured popular radio vocal group the King's Men singing the story of Hartfields and McCoys style feud in the mountains, broken up with two young people from each side fall in love. So very much Romeo and Juliet style story. The segment was later cut from the film's US video release due to comic gunplay, although the film's UK video release has the segment intact, and that's interesting to think about, and understandably around the whole censorship of this film. And I do think personally you should more discuss this is what the film was released at the time. This is how it still is, but we teach the context of why it's not right now. As of 2020, the movie's full uncut presentation with this segment hasn't been released in the US on home media yet, or on Disney Plus yet. Blue Bio, a tone poem, which we'll get onto in a minute, features an the animation originally intended for Fantasia using the Debussy musical composition Clair de Lune. Yay! I didn't butcher that. All the Cats Join In, which is a jazz interlude, is one of the segments to which Benny Goodman contributed, an innovative shot in which a pencil draws the action as it is happening, and in which 1940s teens are swept away by popular music. The US video release has some from the segment digitally altered to shrink the lead girl's bare bust size for censorship purposes, and that's very much understandable of why they would do that, because that's not acceptable now. And I'm starting to realise when watching this, because I didn't actually think about it at the time, it's a lot of this film is quite censored, so maybe that's why nobody really goes ahead and watches these films, because there's so much controversy personally with them, and maybe because we're not teaching audiences of that. This is what was acceptable then. This is not acceptable now. Why are we not discussing that actually contextually? This is why this was, and we're teaching our children that no, that's not right now. And I do think that is something that we need to consider about when talking about these films. Without You is a ballad in the blue, is a ballad of lost love sung by Andy Russell. There's not much more to discuss about this because there's not much that I could find. But I do think it's a beautiful melody. Like I said, there's not a great deal when it comes to these. Casey at the Bat is a musical recitation. Features Jerry Colina reciting the famous poem by Ernest Thayer about an arrogant ball player whose conscience was his undoing. And there's also not a lot to discuss about here either. So I'm gonna move on to the next one. There's like the really small segments here, and I do think that ultimately we are looking at this film as it's all 10 separate stories packaged together, and you have to remember that when looking at these films. Two Silhouettes ballet features two live-action ballet dancers, David Lichine and Tanya Ria Bouchwika. Ria Bao Chins Ria Bao Chins Kaya. Ria Ban Chin Kaya. That's the best you're gonna get from that, because I cannot pronounce that to say. And in a moving in silhouettes with intended backgrounds and characters, Dina Shaw sings the title song, and it's a beautiful song. It's not one that I'm gonna go and watch this, but it's a beautiful sequence. Peter and the Wolf, A Fairy Tale with Music, is an animated dramatization of the 1936 musical composition by Sergei Prokofiev, with narration by actor Sterling Holloway. A Russian boy named Peter sets off into the forest to hunt the wolf with his animal friends, bird named Sasha, a dog named Sophie, and a cat named Ivan. So it's very Russian. And ultimately, I do think that we're looking here at a film that's very much constructed as a let's get this film out together. Like I said, there's not too much for this film, and you're probably thinking, oh, I like the longer videos, but genuinely there's not a lot, and if I'm not gonna be honest, I kind of want to get through the package films because there's so much that isn't there for these films. So if you do think, oh, you're going a bit of speed with these, that's why, because there's not too much when we get to some of the other ones, where some of the other films, like when we get to Cinderella, which is the next big feature film, there's much more in depth on characters, why there's certain costume choices like I did with Snow White and how that helps. So ultimately, we're kind of like, let's get through the 4 that are left before we can start really diving back into those deeper, longer videos. Through musical playground, Johnny Fedora and Alice Bouch Blue Bonnet, A Love Story, tells the romantic story of two hats who fall in love in a department store window. While in Alice's soul, Johnny devotes himself to finding her again, like the Andrews sisters provide the vocals. And that's a really funny story in having these anthropomorphic hats fall in love. And I think that's what some of the Disney features are missing at the moment, is that kind of development of these characters. The Whale Who Wanted to Sing at the Met, Opera Pathétique, is the bittersweet finale about a sperm whale named Willie. With incredible musical talent, who dreams of singing grand opera, but short-sighted impressionano Teti believes that the whale has simply swallowed an opera singer and chases him with a harpoon. Nelson Eddy narrates and performs all the voices in this segment. As Willie the Whale, Eddy sings all 3 male voices in the first part of the sextile from Donizetti's opera, and Lucia de Lammermoor. In the end, Willie is harpooned and killed, but the narrator softens the blow by telling the viewers that he sings in heaven. So it's actually quite dark that tale. And ultimately, I do think it's interesting that Disney went down that path. We know Disney's not a stranger to dark stories, but that as a short is quite dark, and ultimately quite shocking when it comes to certain aspects. So yeah, you can probably tell this episode's going to be quite short this week, and I do think Fun and Fancy Tree will be out on Thursday because I kind of want to get to the more meatier developmental films. So, does it have a legacy in parks, in media? Comparing it to Salidas and the three Cambarellos, it's got more than Salidas does, but a little bit less than three Cambarellos. So, the Peter and the Wolf segments are featured as part of the Disneyland Paris version of Storybook Land Canal Boats, which is cute, and that it has something. It's not there. Casey at the Bar is represented in the parks with Casey's Corner on Main Street, USA, in various parks, and one of the board games at Disney's California Adventure. Willie the Whale appears in the queue poster at Mickey's for the Magic. The scene from After You're Gone segment, where multicolored and Bella balls are rained down upon, can be found in the segment at Wonderful World of Animation in represent Make Me Smile in the Back to the Past segment. Sorry, I just couldn't read that. The music of Kissing in the Back can be heard at Mickey's Toonland, Disneyland, and found across some of the other parks. So it's got a bit more of a history than, let's say, some of the other films have mostly had. But truthfully, there's not too much to discuss about. Sorry, things popped up. So yeah, I think that really wraps up this week's episode of Straight Onto Disney. I hope you enjoyed the more video format, and hopefully it worked for you, and hopefully it makes this a little bit more interesting and dynamic. That you're not just listening to my voice, you can actually see me. So hopefully that works. Yeah, I'm hoping to do this moving forward, like last week's episode. So once again, thank you so much for everyone who's watched and started subscribing to the YouTube channel. I should actually, I'll link the YouTube in the show notes as well. So it's also available on YouTube, as I said. That I completely forget to mention. You can do that. I'm still getting used to this and getting new. It's taken me about 3 or 4 weeks, 3 or 5 weeks of doing this to even remember what my Instagram handle is. So yeah, it's interesting. There's not been too much park news, which is why mousekeeping was a little bit shorter today. It just about merchandise, which I could have rammed on about, but if we look at the Sorcerer's Apprentice episode where I did that, it took a lot. So I'm kind of just gonna cherry pick what I think is interesting throughout the week, and we'll go from there. But the ones I mentioned are kind of big releases, big news related this week. So yeah, I think that's gonna wrap up this week's podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Straight Onto Disney Pod. You can find me on YouTube. It's same as Instagram, Straight Onto Disney Podcast. You can email me at straightontodisneypod@gmail.com, and thank you for listening, and bye.